Hello and welcome to the Bethlehem Icon School online. In today's session we're going to be taking a look at garments, and I hope that after a little bit of instruction you'll be left feeling much more confident and able to draw icons with real spiritual elegance. Last time we began to talk about garments, the push and pull points. We looked at the three different styles. So in this session, I want to sort of break down folds to the next stage. So last time we were looking at those three examples, and we were looking at the Archangel Gabriel here from the Annunciation, the Ochrid one, and we were looking at the general pull and push of the garment. I want to now look in more detail at how folds are made, how they resolve themselves, and how you can create folds that make sense. Now, one of the things I would say is that for a lot of amateur iconography, this is where it all falls apart, because people, especially if you've done sort of shortish courses, the thing that usually happens is you never get into the sort of level of detail that would really help you to understand what you're doing. So this, I think, is the point where you'll maybe pick up some really useful stuff, which might have eluded you on some other courses that you might have done. You can see here how I've put some red marks down at the bottom. And what I want to do is to show how that cloak that's going from the leg on the right-hand side through to the leg on the left, how that affects the way in which the cloth pulls and therefore the way in which folds are made. So this is the Ochrid Angel again. And I want to look in closer detail at how these folds are working. So let's look at this leg. You can see underneath here that leg is coming along there, and there's the knee, and there's the calf muscle, and there it's coming down into the ankle. Can you all see that? Okay. And we can see that the cloth is sort of wrapping around this knee here, pulling round that way and that way. And then the cloth is pulling along this direction. So it's sort of coming down here and pulling round that calf, and then it's going up the top and pulling up round the thigh and actually going up underneath that cover band that we saw. And then we've got the garment coming round from this direction, and it's hitting that shin there, and then coming round that shin, which is rounded. Okay, so you've got a curve there. So we've got cloth coming from the top to the bottom. We've got the cloth coming from right to left. And the folds show us how it all comes together. So we've got what you call a bunch point. Can you see it's flaring out? So it's coming from a broad part and then bunching together where it reaches the shin. And then it's coming round the shin and opening up again. So you've got like two triangles overlapping. So you've got the triangle of cloth from the right and the triangle of cloth from the left. And they're meeting on that shin. So that's where it's got to be resolved. So it's coming around the shin and across in, let me use a different color now. So it's resolving here. That's the point where it turns direction. And so this bit of cloth here is overlapping that bit of cloth there. So it's one on top of the other. Now, of course, you don't, it's as it were the energy which we're seeing. So that overlaps there, like that. And then see that sweeping round to there. So they're meeting here as one is wrapping round the other and one bit is going behind the other. And where it bulks up here, for example, this area here, it's being pushed together. And so it's coming on top and making a fold there. Let me go over this again and say it in a slightly different way. So if we think of this one piece of cloth, if we imagine there's one piece of cloth like that, but where the push point is, it's pushing the cloth down like that. And that means that there's a lot of cloth bunching up at that point. So you've got your arrow shape, the energy which is pulling from one side to the other, and the other arrow shape from this side. And where it's coming together, all the cloth is bunching up. And those bunches is what you need to resolve. You need to show that intelligently. By that, I mean, you need to have thought through what is actually happening. What line is showing what? So I shall. What's wrong with this? This is okay. So how do we resolve it? Well, we know that it's going to go from a wider shape to a narrower shape. There's the narrower area here, and that's wider there. So you need to get some sort of arrow shape. And the same thing is coming from this direction here. Let me put that like that. So they're crossing over on this axis. Okay. So where I've just put that, let me put that in another color. So that, where I've marked the red line, this is where the push from the bone is coming, and it's going all the way along. The blue garment, the blue line represents how the garment is pulling against that point. And it's bunching the cloth up, so it's narrowing it, which means that the cloth is folding on top of each other. It's one bunching up and coming on top of the other. So we need to be able to show that. So can you see where the two blue lines cross at the top there? We could take this one off, or we could take this one off. It would show the same thing. In this particular example, they've taken off the, as it were, the one going over to the left. That shows the cloth folding on top of each other. at the same time, you've got to make sense of the rest of the cloth. So you decided that's where it's folding on top of each other. And you know if it folds, then it's going to be pushing the cloth together like that. That makes sense? Yeah. Okay. So it's pulling round, and the push is pushing the cloth together. And where you push cloth together, you get wrinkles or folds. So you've got your folds here. See that? And they're in parallel to that line there. And they're going from a narrow point to a wider point. Okay. So narrow to wide, wide to narrow, arrow shapes all the time. Okay. So the same thing here. If we took that through to there and that to there, see how that little fold see that one there? Can you see there's that little fold here where it's pulling and compressing the one cloth against the other. So in the garments, when you make a fold, it pushes through and shows itself in different ways. So the pull and push, the way it's working around this area here, is worked out in terms of what cloth is on top of what other cloth. So it's, you have to really think through how the garments bunch together. Now, the other thing to watch is if this is coming down here, and that's where you make your fold. One, there's a bit of a bigger shadow at the end there where it bunches round. It's folding round. It's not one cloth on top of the other. It's going round and tucking underneath. So it's like a pebble being thrown into the water. It has ripple effects. So the cloth has to come to that point and then up. So it's got a sort of round, echoing that shape there. So where that fold is working and pushing out, it's as it were pushing out in ripples all the way along that garment. So you get the ripple and then pull them up to another point where that pull point is here. And likewise across here. Okay. Let's turn my sound off my phone. Okay. Does that make some sort of sense? If somebody's not following me, just send me a comment. And you can see then the same thing on the right-hand side of this fold. Notice that that pull point here is where these folds come from and then open up. And this is the same thing. It's coming round to here, and see they come from a narrow point and open up, a narrow point and open up. So let me just take that off, and I'll now demonstrate it from scratch. So we know where the point, the stress point is going to be here, where the pull and the push come together. So we're going to have one piece of cloth coming in there and another piece of cloth coming in there. It's going to go round that point and then it's going to open up. So I want to be coming narrower there and wider here. And then I need to connect these up. So it's coming round that point, and it's coming round that point in that way. And then here on this side here, it's coming round that point again into a arrow shape with the line below it, and another one just to curve round, and that's coming in, that's going out like that. Is that making some sense? Okay, it may be useful to say that you can use the keyboard to take a photo. Control, Alt, and 4 to select an area and take a photo of what I'm doing. Thank you for that, Eleanor. I didn't know that. There you are. You learn something every day. Nice, useful tool. So, next thing I want to do. Right, we've got 4.5 minutes. That's okay. So, let me continue with this, and then I'll open the meeting up, and I'm going to open the meeting again, and then there's a couple of videos I want to show you about how to make individual folds and that kind of thing. So if we look at this, finally, one of the other things to look at is, let me take this off. When the garment folds over, say at this point, here, it sort of is wider there and then comes, so you get a little line that then opens up and becomes thicker. And that's because if you see a piece of cloth and you fold it over, you get a little bit of shadow. So quite often, and you can see it down here, see how that highlight has come round and it's wider at the end and tailing off. So that can quite often help. Now, other times it just resolves itself as a narrowing line, like here. But if you think this here is not a bunch of cloth going round it, it's just disappearing round. So you've got to think about what sort of shadow effect it would cause. So in terms of making convincing garments, you've got to understand where the pull and the push is, but you also need to think about how the cloth is operating. Is it bulking out? Is it creating shadows? Or is it pulling round in a thin way? Okay? Right, folks, well, I'm going to stop there, reopen the meeting immediately, and then I'll show you the video, which is how to do individual folds. Okay, so let me stop share, end meeting. I've got a couple of videos that I've made to show you how to draw them, but before we get into that, I want to really look at what's going on here. So if you look where those red lines are, and I'm going to now add some extra ones, but I'll do these in yellow. There we are. So can you see that there's the leg and the thigh? That angle of the leg is sort of continuing right up there. And then along the thigh here, you've got those directions showing up. So they're all sort of coming in the same angle really as that leg, and sort of pulling across to the left-hand side. So that's the direction at which this construction is going. I'll take this back a bit now. So let me just get an easier pencil. So if you look at the way in which this is going here, so it's coming down, this is coming down. Those are the main folds that we can see. And they're pulling in the same direction from the thigh down across, but then they're being pulled across here. So somehow behind there, it's sort of bunching up and pulling then around here. Now, when you make a bunch, if you think of if you grabbed a piece of cloth in your hand, it would be bunched up in your fist and then radiate out from there in folds. So if you see where it's coming around the ankle or the calf here, it's all bunching up. It's narrowing the cloth. It's the same piece of cloth, but it's all being pulled together and then wrapped round there. So it begins wider here. See that from there to there and there to there is narrower. Take that back now. And I'm going to just, so there and there, you see how that's forming a triangle. So it's, if you extend it out, those lines would meet somewhere there. But in fact, it's not just pulled flat, it's pulled and then round. So where it meets there, it's going to overlap. So let me show this. So notice that fold down here is where things are going to happen. And as that's pulling across here, so this garment underneath it is being pulled together and is making into folds. So this is pulling onto this. Now, though they're two separate garments, they're still being affected by the same structure underneath. So the thigh, the leg, the shin is impacting on both garments together. And that's why if you see those red lines, it comes down on the one garment up here, but then changes direction when it meets the garment pulling across. So it's coming down in this direction and then making a fold there. They're two separate garments, but they're still following the same structure. So let me just rub that out from it. I want to change this to a inking set. So this fold here, for example, this line here from here is going up there, and this is going up there. And you see this fold here is connecting to that line there. This line here connecting to there, and that's connecting to there. This line here connects to that line. This is a sort of coming round of that. And even here, this line, if you follow it up, will take you to that point there. So if you understand your construction, you can put the garments together. Don't know if this is making sense, but hopefully you're getting the basic gist of what I'm saying. So don't disregard the relationship between one garment on top of another. Okay, they need to be consistent. There needs to be a unity in the whole composition. So I think you get the point of what I was trying to get at, I hope. Understanding the unity of the whole garment. So we want the unity of everything always to be in our minds. So you want the unity first. Don't be tempted to go into details too soon, because what often happens is you lose your understanding and it fragments and it doesn't quite hang together right. So try and push yourself to really see the whole. And even as you're going through the process, keep making yourself look to the bigger picture. Don't get stuck with the details. And it's a real temptation, because, you know, it's quite overwhelming trying to hold all the stuff together. And if you can get into one little fold or into the eyes or whatever it might be, it can be very seductive. And you get so carried away that it can lose the harmony of the whole. So please, please, please keep pushing yourself to look to the whole. So don't just look at a fold, look at that whole area of that garment. Don't just look at that area, look at the whole garment, where it's coming from, where it's going to, its volume. Don't just look at one garment, but look at how it relates to the garments around it, either above it or below it. And then always, always, always relate it to the figure underneath and the posture, so that you don't lose the stature, the elegance, the presence of the figure. And that should ripple through every single part of your work, even to the last fold. So having said all of that, I now want to show you how to draw folds. Okay, so all of this was important to get you to the point of really being able to handle this next bit. So I'm going those main pull points, that big fold of cloth that's going to go between the two legs. So I'm getting my angle of my leg in there, angle of that thigh and shin. And now the general direction of the pull points coming. And notice I'm going right through that fold that's going across at the moment, so that what's underneath is going to relate to what's on the top. So I'm drawing through the band, and basically where that band's going across, it's gathering things together. So you're getting those V shapes wider at the bottom, coming up to the point, and the point is where that band is going across. Now I'm drawing these deliberately very faint because this is going to give me the freedom later to develop and develop the construction. So I'm sorry if they're a little faint and you can't see them maybe quite so well, but that's actually quite important to draw in a light way. So now I'm beginning to refine that drawing. And can you see there's a rhythm emerging in those shapes, those triangular shapes that have come down to the bottom? So here, here, and here, they're resting on each other. There's a unity to them. Now I'm trying to resolve what's happening where it's sort of flaring at the front there. Now, just pause that for a minute. If you've got a curtain, for example,
are you still working in this old that is so inefficient?
You get swags.
Most people have some sort
so
of
if you know where the curtain rings are up here, and the cloth is pulled to that point, and it sort of swags at the top, but down at the bottom it makes those folds, and the folds themselves swag. So the pull point right at the top has an effect all the way down, and how it resolves at the bottom relates to where the pull point is at the top. And it's not just straight across, it's scooped. It might be scooped a little bit, or it might be scooped a lot, but they do relate to the overall form. So let me go back to the video. So it's now making a scoop. It's coming down. It's got to come round itself, come back up after a swag. So what I'm doing now, I'm trying to resolve the way in which the cloth is folding along the bottom, because some is going to be on top and some is going to be underneath. Where it's going underneath, you've got to sort of tuck it in. And then where it comes round to the next one. So you've got to have a sort of consistency of what's on in front and what goes behind. So we've got a sort of rhythm going on here. Now, having sort of got a nice straight triangles, some of them I'm now breaking up with slight curves. Now, the reason for this is it shows us a billowing fold. The angel is moving, so the cloth is sort of filling with air, and that's billowing it out. So if you think of a sail, or you think of, if you're running along the street in your dress and the air gets inside it, it makes folds, but it blows the folds up like little parachutes. So you've got to be thinking about what's happening to the folds with that movement. But again, you're keeping the rhythm. It's not just random. There is a unity in all things. So even though this is something which seems quite trivial, the folds in a garment, it's still speaking theologically about the unity of all things, the unity which God brings to all of creation. So there is distinction and unity. That gives harmony and beauty without it being boring and staid or being chaotic. So we're trying to handle between those two things. We don't want chaos, but we don't want it to be stilted and boring in a sort of rigid way. So can you see how I've sort of begun to make that fold at the front sort of billow outwards and wrap round the calf. Don't worry too much. The next video will look into the details of how you do these individual folds. But the most important thing at the moment is to see, you know, you've got to weave them together as though it's one continuous piece of cloth. So each fold relates to the bit of cloth next to it, either in front of it or behind it. As I'm going along, I'm critiquing my own work. I'm asking myself, does this make sense if the line is here or not? And don't be afraid to change it. And especially as you get more into the detail of the folds, you need to, you know, move some of those lines around. So you can see here, as I'm sort of making sense of these folds, I'm, especially at the bottom there, having to push some things down, pull other things up. So I'm thinking through, where would the pull be and the swag be? Now, what you see in the original is a very flattened version. That's its style. I'm opening that up a little bit so that it's more towards that classical style, but it's still the same garment. You can see it's the same logic. I'm just giving it a little bit more volume and depth, whereas in the model it's really sort of reduced down. Now don't worry, I've got another video which is going to go into how to make individual folds. Okay, so we're going to go deeper into this on the next video. At this point, I just want you to see how there's a unity in that whole garment, how those directional lines are reflected in the shapes that you're seeing to emerge. So you've got one garment that's cutting across the other, and it's pulling that garment in, and that's affecting the direction of all those folds. And that was established right at the beginning, and we're now refining it. Okay, so if you see an example like this, and you're trying to understand it, begin like I did there by putting the basic direction of those pull lines and just establish them as lines that take you right through both garments. Then relate one garment to the other. So the way those garments pull those lines in, it bunches the undergarment. So I'm now going to show you the second video, which is how to make basic folds. Okay, you can see when you looked at that, I'm sure some of you were thinking, I am completely lost. He lost me after 2 or 3 minutes. I couldn't see what he was doing and why he was doing that. I got that vague sense of those directional lines, but after that, I'm sorry, I don't know quite what you were doing. So that's exactly where I thought you would be, so don't worry about that. Now you can see how they would sort of basically go together. We can now dig into how you make individual folds, and then you can go back to that and say, so that was the directional line, and then you make folds in this way, and you can put it all together, and hopefully this will give you your toolkit for drawing for yourself. So let me now move to the second video. Establish the width of a fold and where it's going to tuck behind. And now I'm putting in the swag. And now I've got to weave the fold. So it's going behind and then it's going to come out again. So there's the tuck. You see those lines coming down from the same pull point above. The line coming, the tuck coming up and not joining the segment line there. Okay, those lines on the same curve because you've got to keep the unity of the fold. And then it's going to sweep out that way. So now I can take out that line there. And if I can just stop it for a moment, you see here where I've got my mouse, this line does not join that line. That's a very, very, very common mistake that's made, that people join this line with this line. And why you shouldn't do that is because this is a piece of cloth weaving itself round. So it's one piece of cloth. If you put that line across to there, it cuts the cloth off and it becomes one sewn on top of the other one or stuck onto the other one. So just even if it's just the tiniest gap, leave it there and there. And you'll see later on in this video that they're putting the shadows in now. Now in the icon, you don't have a lot of shadow because the light is from within rather than reflected light, but you need a certain amount of shadow to give form. And according to whether it's more of a classical or an abstract or an ethereal style, you'll have less or more being done with the shadows. So this is more of a classical interpretation of a fold. So I put the shadows in there. Now I'm going to go back now. You might think it was almost done, but actually there's more to do. I'm strengthening those defining lines. And I want to just show you where I'm drawing just there. Can you see I'm now just tucking it in slightly? See on the other side, I've done that. So it's coming round that point and then swagging. So you see here where you've got that little point, it's bulging out, and so this is coming round that point and then swagging round to where it's going to fold back. And the same thing is happening here. See that coming in there, just a little tweak, and then coming round. I want to strengthen those definitions so it's much sharper and crisper. And notice I've given that little chink on the curve just here. So it's come up and then swagging down. Okay. Now that's a straight hanging fold. The next fold I want to do is where there's a bit of movement. So like if the angel's moving in and it's going to billow out. So, oh, wait a minute, before I do that, I'm just going to calligraphize that final drawing. And this is an ink pen. So this it's just like a brush. So it's thin, thick, thin. See, I put thin, thick to give those little shadows at the corners of the folds. Same thing there. So one of the things about iconographic style is is calligraphy. What I'm using now is an ink pen. It's a Japanese ink pen, which I picked up from some craft shop somewhere. You could just use a brush, but I prefer, it's easier just to use this for this demonstration. So you can see that's got that calligraphic feel to it now, which helps to really sort of take the sensuality out while emphasizing the elegance. Now the next fold I'm going to do is a billowing fold. So you sometimes see that when the angel's moving, so the cloak billows out, or the bottom of the garment billows out to show that there's movement. So rather than just hanging down, there's a bit of air getting underneath it. So again, we've got the basic width established, but then I've got to break it out, and it's got to sort of fold back on itself. Let me just pause this for a second. Okay. So let me just move that so my hand's out the way. Okay. So let me just move that so my hand's out the way. Just trying to get the right frame where that's it. So this is the directional line. This is then the width here of the bottom of the fold. Is coming round itself here and round itself there, because a fold is always part of a series of folds. It's part of one long piece of cloth. It's very rare you'll just get one fold on its own. So it's going to fold back on its own and then come back round into another one. So be aware of that. And so now it's coming back on itself, sweeping across to the next fold. And then here, I'm putting where that fold is tapering up to the pull point. That might be the thigh or the shoulder, or wherever it might be. So can you see that whereas the one above has just come straight down and made a regular parting, in this one, it's coming down but then breaking open. And that's because the air is underneath and it's pushing it. Now, same direction as it tucks underneath. Again, the swag with the little shadow area at the end, tucking it in. That little shadow point. And now I'm putting the shadows in there. Now, if you think about it, why would I be putting shadow in there? Because that part of the fold is behind. So this area here is behind this area here. Get my hand out of the way a bit. So can you see this is all one fold, but this bit here is on top of that bit there. So that's tucked behind and that's coming on the top. And understanding how you're doing clothing is all about understanding what bit of cloth is on top and what bit of cloth is underneath. So we indicate that it's underneath by giving it a little bit of shadow. So you've now got a hierarchy, like steps. And obviously this bit of cloth here is underneath that bit of cloth. So that should at least have the same shadow. If you didn't put the shadow in there, it would make this underneath that. Okay. So I'm refining that area there by putting that little bit of shadow in there. See, can you see now how this piece of cloth, this area, is standing in front of everything else? And it's the shadows that have defined that. So this line here has to be then augmented by the shadow there to push this bit of cloth on top of that. Here, these lines have to be augmented by this shadow here and this shadow here to put this bit of cloth on top of that and then on top of that. And the pencil that I'm using, Eleanor, for this is usually a 4B at this stage. I might have moved to a 2B or a 2H even, if I want to refine them very precisely. And again, I'm just going to calligraphize these with this brush. Thin, thick, thin lines are really, really expressive, and they help give the icon spiritual elegance. So working on your brush strokes to be able to produce really good, consistent line production is important. It's well worth the investment of your time. Okay, so there you can see these two types of folds and how those have been developed. And notice there with that calligraphy, I've strengthened the line where the shadow area is. And that's one of the beautiful things about using a brush, is by thickening the brush, it gives you more shadow. If you have a thinner line, obviously it's less dark, and that means less shadow. So by clever use of calligraphy, you can really become quite expressive. So, stop share. So that now then, looks like using the elbow and the thin, thick, thin to denote the edge of the fabric and the gap also. Now, when you say using the elbow, Royce, I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, I meant that when it was going around the end of the other line, you had a change of direction twice, which forms like an elbow, like a real elbow.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, so it's when you're folding things, you do end up with that push point and that fold around where that's taking place. Yeah, and it's giving you the gap and the edge, but also some of the shadow. So when you're doing, even in a very ethereal style, when it's really just lines, getting a certain calligraphy into that can be really important. So you might not be using a lot of shadow, but by using really calligraphic lines, you can do make something that's really, really expressive. Now, with what you've just gone through, hopefully this is going to make a bit more sense. So if we look at the way the garment here is hanging, this cloth that's over his arm, there's his arm. See, it's pulling from here down here, and from there underneath down here, resolving itself with another pull here. The reason you've got these this staggering is because of gravity. So it's a fairly vertical arm, and so the gravity is sort of pulling it, and there's a push of the arm against that gravity, but it's minimum resistance, so it's almost straight down. So that's coming down. This cloth here, see that little bit at the top, is on top of the cloth underneath. And it's coming down, and then it's folding round. So you see this is lighter here and darker there. And this edge comes down, and then it stops as a dark line, but it still continues as a faint line to here. and then the cloth is coming down round that point and then sweeping across to here. So you've got your, if you look at that fold, it's coming from here and coming from sort of here. And this swag, if you follow that point up, is coming from there as well. And so you've got this point, and this point relating to where it's pulling from. And likewise, you see where it's folding behind, that angle of that line takes you up to that point as well. Likewise here, this is then another fold that's coming from here. So that line there, you follow it up, is taking you to this point here. Okay, so we've got swags. You get to see what somebody's now, Enna's, yeah, you're talking about the type of cloth. Obviously, if you've got thin cloth, the gap here and here and here is going to be thinner. If you've got thick cloth, this will be a bigger gap. And if you have lots of folds, say for example over here, you see how it's going round and making quite a dark fold, and it's a thin edge. That's also suggesting that this is thin cloth rather than thicker cloth. So you can see here how these folds relate to the form underneath, how it's making these larger triangle shapes, which are then being related, joined up to each other. So you need distinction and unity. It's one piece of cloth, it's one body shape underneath, and everything is going towards that same, to express that same thing. But each fold has its own unity. So you need to look at each fold and make each part make sense. So you look at the whole, you look at the specific. Look at the specific, look back to the whole. Don't just get carried away on doing your folds at the bottom. You've got to relate it all the time to what you've constructed before. So again, don't just copy blindly, construct. Construct your folds, construct your body, construct your garments at every stage.